مرة تانية مشاهدينا الكرام، بطبيعة الحال منذ أن ضربت جائحة كورونا العالم، سوق العمل ظروفه اختلفت منذ 2020 إلى يومنا هذا. ولكن ما قبل انتشار متحور أوميكرون، يعني بنتكلم على لحد من 3 4 5 شهور، كانت الرؤية لسوق العمل مختلفة عن التوقعات اللي موجودة في الوقت الراهن. طب التوقعات اللي موجودة في الوقت الراهن مبنية على أساس إيه؟ على أساس تقرير اللي صدر مؤخرا هذا الأسبوع من منظمة العمل الدولية. تقرير بيتكلم عن اتجاهات التوظيف عالميا والتوقعات الاجتماعية والتأثيرات الاجتماعية، ده وفقا ل 2022. بطبيعة الحال الأرقام اختلفت بحكم أنه متحور أوميكرون انتشاره سريع، فعمل هزة وربكة في سوق العمل. طيب التقرير ده أرقامه عاملة إزاي؟ ظروفه عاملة إزاي؟ بتقول إيه التوقعات للسنة القادمة؟ إلى أي مدى تأثر سوق العمل مش بس بسبب متحور أوميكرون، إنما بسبب معدلات التضخم العالية اللي بيعاني منها العالم النهاردة؟ إلى أي مدى موضوع التطعيمات ممكن يكون فارق من دولة إلى أخرى في ظروف سوق العمل ومعدلات التوظيف؟ كل هذه الأمور يساعدنا أن نتساءل بشأنها وفقا لهذا التقرير، وده هيكون من خلال حوارنا مع السيد جاي رايدر، المدير العام لمنظمة العمل الدولية، التي يسعدنا أن ينضم إلينا عبر زوم من جنيف. Mr. Ryder, good evening. Thank you so much for your time, and we're glad to have you today on our show.
Thank you for your invitation.
Thank you. The pleasure is ours. Let us start off with the latest report regarding the world employment and social outlook trends. To what extent did the Omicron variant have a huge effect on the labor market worldwide?
Yeah, well, we've been tracking the impact of COVID on labor markets since the beginning of the pandemic. And of course, this has been a terrible economic and social crisis which has come from the health emergency. We think the overall impact has been 4 times more severe than what happened with the global financial crisis back in 2008. But clearly things are getting better. We are seeing a recovery in the global economy. Global growth is estimated to be a little bit more than 4% in 2022. But what does it look like from the point of view of jobs and employment? Well, there the news is a little less positive, I have to say. Our estimate for 2022, the year that's just beginning, is that the number of hours worked in the global economy will still be significantly below pre-pandemic levels. We think it'll be 1.8% below the pre-pandemic levels, and that's the equivalent of 52 million full-time jobs. So you see, we're not back to where we started. The labor crisis is certainly not finished. The recovery is not complete. And I think there are 2 more points I need to make. One is that this estimate of the loss of 52 million jobs, it's a much worse provision than we made 6 months ago. We thought 6 months ago that the recovery would be much better. And this reflects the fact that COVID-19 is still affecting us. And the second point I should make is that this is a very unequal recovery. The richer countries, the more advanced economies are recovering more quickly than the developing countries and the emerging economies. Why is that? 2 simple reasons. Firstly, they have vaccinated more of their population. Their vaccination rollout has been greater. And secondly, they have more fiscal resources, more finance to invest in the stimulation of their economies, promoting enterprises and protecting workers.
Yeah, so the recovery rate differs from one region or one country to another. Does this difference also is clear enough regarding the effect of Omicron, especially that, like you have mentioned, the vaccination rollout? Is it a huge variable affecting the unemployment rate or job losses rate versus the recovery rate as well?
Yeah, it really is. One of the major factors here is the inadequate rollout of vaccinations, particularly in the developing world. I'll give you the figure for Africa. I mentioned that the global figure is a reduction in working hours of 1.8%. In Africa, that is 2.6%, 10 million jobs. So we do need to see a much better international effort, I would say, to increase vaccination in the developing world. But equally, there are financial constraints on the developing world as well. So these are the two crucial variables, as you put it, which we think are inhibiting full recovery.
And is inflation today that is affecting the whole world, is it a third variable affecting the labor market?
Inflation is beginning to be felt, isn't it, around the world? And I think it's being felt in different respects. We're seeing global energy prices taking a big increase. We certainly feel that here in Europe, where I'm speaking to you from. But also we're seeing, as the global economy begins to move again, supply is still constrained. Global supply chains are still not operating as they normally should. They're blocked in some cases. So demand is greater than supply, and of course the result there is that inflation takes place. I think the big unanswered question still is whether this increase in inflation is a temporary phenomenon while the economy gets started again, or whether there is something more permanent and more structural involved. And if that is the case, that is another variable, as you put it, because we might see interest rates going up. And of course, interest rates going up places more financial pressure on a number of countries.
True. You have mentioned that, or you did a comparison between what things are now and the projections of today compared to the pre-COVID period. Can we shift to the pre-Omicron period? To what extent there's a huge difference?
Yeah, well, again, I mean, in 2020, we saw a dramatic heart attack in the global economy, I would say. We lost 8.8% of work. Now, we're pulling our way back. We are going in the right direction. It's too slow. It's slower than we first thought it would be. I've repeated it, it's unequal. I would add as well that there is a great fragility to this recovery because many risks are out there. What this pandemic is going to do next, will inflation take off? Will some of the international tensions in trade and relations also get in the way? Our estimate is that we're not going to get back to the starting point, to the pre-pandemic macroeconomic indicators before 2023, and that's still a long way off. So I have to say we're not out of the forest yet.
Yeah. And did you notice that job losses were more than the rate of unemployment, or vice versa?
We've seen two things happening. Firstly, yes, unemployment has gone up, and unemployment remains above pre-pandemic levels. There are, in the world, 21 million more people unemployed than there were before the pandemic. But we've seen another phenomenon, and this is very important, and people don't perhaps pay enough attention to it. We saw a lot of people simply leave the labor market. They became inactive. They gave up, or they simply found other things to do. And this is a major problem. In fact, the bigger problem in terms of lost output and work has come from people becoming inactive more than becoming unemployed. And I think from the Egyptian perspective, this is also very important. This has happened in Egypt, the global economy. I can think of two in particular. One, very obviously, is digitalization. More and more work depends on the application of digital technologies. So you need the capacity, you need the connectivity of digital processes, and you need to create the skills. And the second point, and I think this is, if I just might go on, the second point is about climate change. You know, Egypt is taking over the leadership of the global process of negotiation of climate change agreements, and we'll be looking to Egypt not just for its own national purposes, but internationally to be giving us leadership in this year ahead. In the field of climate change, because the world of work is fundamentally dependent upon controlling climate change.
Well, but regarding the first point, the private sector and direct foreign investment, in the projects that are present in Egypt lately, the private sector was part of it. But correct me if I'm wrong, because I noticed that the private sector and the direct foreign investment worldwide has been kind of shrinking due to the vagueness of what's going to be happening in the next 6 months or year, because of the COVID, because of the pandemic, definitely, because the vaccination rate, because of some other political issues that are going between some countries. So this kind of vagueness, usually makes the investment movement worldwide at a lower rate, if I might say. What do you think of that?
I agree with you 100%. I think there are two things here. Each country, I think, needs to work to provide the right types of conditions to attract foreign direct investment. It depends on legislation. It depends on the efficiency of state institutions and public institutions. It depends on having the right labor and social practices in place, because investors are very sensitive to that. But then you talk about the international environment, and I want to agree with you very strongly. I think if there's one thing we all know, it's that investors hate uncertainty. They hate the risks that go with the lack of clarity, as you put it. That lack of clarity may come from COVID itself. It may, as you've indicated, come from some of the political issues which are in our world today. It might come from other questions as well. It might come from a lack of clarity in public policy. So yes, and we do need to try to provide greater certainty. I think this also throws into focus the need for better international cooperation, be it on trade negotiations, investment negotiations, resolving tensions in the international system, which are certainly present at the moment. And I think they're reducing the common purpose, the appetite for international cooperation. This we need to restore as well. It's very important.
Yeah. I want to go back to the idea of vaccination, because obviously it's one of the challenges the world is facing today, because at some countries they had to impose it mandatory on the people, and in some companies actually it was mandatory as well, being imposed. How do you see that? Because a lot of countries and a lot of companies are facing a challenge with some of the people who are still anti-vaccine.
Yes, we see these people. We see this resistance to vaccinations. I have to say it's generally, I can't speak for Egypt, I can speak for the countries I know a little better. I mean, this is a minority of people who do not wish to be vaccinated. The question is, what should governments, what should employers do in such situations? And you're right. I think there is a tendency, as a pandemic has grown and continued, to be a little bit stricter on these matters. So in some countries, you see a movement towards mandatory vaccinations. I'll give you the example of Italy. It's a country where, if you want to go into a workplace, you must show proof of having been vaccinated. This is the situation that's going on. Now, we're not advocating policies of mandatory vaccination, but we're making it firstly very clear that we need to make efforts to encourage vaccination. We have to convince people of the benefits of vaccination. And then, of course, we have to make sure vaccines are available to people. And it is a tragedy and a failure of international policy that in large parts of the world, people don't have the choice. They just don't have the possibility of having a vaccine. So these are areas that we need to work very much upon.
Mr. Ryder, if you may allow me to end with one question, because a lot of people around the world, they love the what ifs. So some specialists and doctors today are saying that with the Omicron variant, it's closer to the flu or influenza, which is making them predict that 2022 would be the end of the pandemic, as we have been witnessing it the past 2 years. So what if? What if it was really the end of the pandemic during 2022? To what extent would this give a boost to the employment rate worldwide?
There is great hope, isn't there?
Yeah.
That Omicron represents the transition from a pandemic situation to an endemic situation.
Yeah.
As you say, a more flu-like condition that we'll all live with and can operate more or less normally. Now, if that is the case, and I'm sure I join with you in expressing the strong hope that that is the case, then I think that the figures that we have put out in our report today for 2022, those figures can improve, that we can get our global economy moving again, get people back to work again. That does not mean, of course, that all of our problems are solved, because all of those pre-existing problems of technology, of climate change, of skills development, of investment, they're still with us. But they give us a chance now to tackle all of those challenges in much better conditions.
Yeah, well, fingers crossed. We hope that it turns from a pandemic to an endemic very soon. And hopefully then we'll see another report for the ILO in next June, let's say, which would have more promising numbers.
Inshallah.
Inshallah, inshallah. Mr. Ryder, thank you so much for your time. ILO Director General Guy Ryder, thank you so much for your time. And it's a great pleasure having you today with us on our show.